The fall of Númenor was not born in the shadow of Sauron's temple, but in the cold silence of a royal bedchamber, centuries before the first stone of that dark edifice was ever laid. Before the great wave came, a poison had already entered the heart of the kingdom, a slow, creeping corruption that began not with a dark lord, but with a broken heart. This is not a tale of grand armies, but of a domestic war between a king who loved the sea more than his wife, and a queen whose bitterness became a political weapon, carving a wound into the soul of their people that would never heal. This is the lost chronicle of the House of Tar-Aldarion, a story of ambition and resentment that set the greatest kingdom of men on its inexorable path to ruin. In the golden years of the Second Age, Númenor was the pinnacle of human achievement, a gift from the Valar to the faithful Edain who had fought against Morgoth. Its people were long-lived, wise, and tall, a race more akin to the Eldar of the West than to the lesser men of Middle-earth. The fifth king, Tar-Meneldur, was a scholar, a man of peace who loved the stars more than the sea, and under his gentle rule, the island knew a profound and lasting tranquility. But his son was not like him. The heir to the throne was a man of fire and wind, restless and ambitious. His name was Anardil, meaning son-friend, but from his youth he was known by another name, Aldarion. The mariner, the sea longing was in his blood, a deep and powerful music that the quiet lands of Númenor could not satisfy. From his earliest days as prince, Aldarion looked east, towards the hazy shores of Middle-earth. While his father studied the heavens, he studied the tides. He founded the Guild of Venturers, a brotherhood of mariners and shipwrights, and with them, he began to push the boundaries of the known world. He built great ships, stronger and faster than any before, and sailed them into the unknown, disappearing for years at a time. To the people, he was a glorious hero, the future of their nation. But one cannot look only to the horizon without ignoring what is right before them. In the westlands of Númenor lived a woman named Erendis. She was not of the royal line of Elros, but she was of noble blood, renowned for her beauty and her unyielding spirit. Unlike Aldarion, her love was for the land. She loved the deep roots of the ancient trees, the quiet hills, and the steadfast, unchanging earth of her home. The sea, to her, was a thing of turmoil and disquiet, a gray and hungry void that stole men away. Yet when the glorious Prince Aldarion returned from one of his great voyages, their paths crossed, and a fire was lit between these two opposing poles of the world. Their courtship was a whirlwind. He was captivated by her stillness, the anchor she represented in his storm-tossed life. She was drawn to his passion, the sheer force of his will that seemed to bend the world around him. For a time, it seemed that the sea and the land could be reconciled in their union. He delayed his voyages to be with her. He gave her a diamond, a pledge that he would marry her upon his next return. But the sea is a jealous mistress. The call of the waves was a constant whisper in Aldarion's soul, a promise of glory and discovery that no mortal love could silence. The promise of a wedding ring became a chain, and the years he was meant to be gone stretched into an agonizing wait. But as Erendis waited, her love did not simply fade. It curdled into something far more dangerous. What happens when a queen's love turns to stone? Aldarion was gone for 7 years. 7 years of silence. He sailed the coasts of Middle-earth, establishing the first permanent Númenorian haven at a place he named Vignalande, the New Haven. He journeyed inland and met the elven king Gilgalad, learning for the first time of a new shadow stirring in the east, a malevolent servant of the old enemy, Morgoth. Aldarion felt the weight of destiny upon him. He believed Númenor's strength was needed to protect the world. He was saving the world, and his betrothed was withering at home. When he finally returned, he was a harder man, weathered by the sea and burdened by the knowledge of a coming darkness. He found Erendis a colder woman, her heart shielded by pride and resentment. Their reunion was not of joy, but of bitter accusation. Yet the old fire was not entirely extinguished. After much strife and the intervention of the king, they were wed. The marriage was a catastrophe from the start. Aldarion's duty, as he saw it, was to the future, to the building of Númenor's naval power, to counter the threat in Middle-earth. He spent his days in the shipyards of Romena, not the halls of Armanelos. Erendis, now his queen, felt herself a widow to a living husband. The great shipyards, the pride of the nation, were to her a monument to her loneliness. The sound of hammers on timber was the sound of her husband choosing his true love, and it was not her. She made a choice. She would not compete. She would retreat. Erendis abandoned the court. She returned to her ancestral home in the green heart of the island, far from the sound and smell of the sea. There, in her white closets, she created a court in exile, surrounding herself with those who shared her view. that Númenor's destiny lay within its own shores, not in foreign wars and endless exploration. Her quiet departure was a silent scream of protest, a political act that drew a line in the very soil of the kingdom. It was the first schism. The people began to take sides, whispering in halls and marketplaces. Were you for the king and the sea, or the queen and the land? Then, a flicker of hope. Erendis bore Tar-Aldarion a child, a daughter, their only child, whom they named Ankalaim, most bright. For a brief time, the mariner king stayed home. He held his daughter and saw in her a reason to remain, a future to be nurtured on the island, not just across the sea. The ice between husband and wife seemed to thaw. It did not last. The letters from Gil-galad in Middle-earth grew more urgent. The shadow was lengthening. Tar-Aldarion, now crowned the sixth king of Númenor after his father's passing, felt the call of duty as a physical weight. He had to go. He believed his kingdom's very survival depended on it. He planned his longest voyage yet, one that would keep him away for well over a decade. When he told Erendis, something inside her finally broke. Her love had died, and in its place, a terrible resolve grew. She would raise their daughter, but she would not raise her to be a king's heir. She would raise her to be her daughter. She would teach Ankalaim to love the land, to fear the sea, and to distrust the world of men that had caused her mother such pain. She would forge her daughter into a weapon, a living embodiment of her own grief and resentment. A king and queen's private war had now poisoned the next generation, threatening to twist the very line of succession into an instrument of vengeance. But Tar-Aldarion would make a move that no one, least of all Erendis, could have predicted. A change to the law so profound it would shatter tradition and set his daughter on a collision course with destiny. Tar-Aldarion was gone for 18 years. When he returned, he was a grim, middle-aged man who had seen war and the growing might of Sauron. He returned to a kingdom more powerful on the seas than ever before, but more divided at home than he could have imagined. He returned to a wife who would not even come to the capital to greet him, and a daughter who was a complete stranger. Ankalaim, now a young woman, was her mother's creature. She was proud, beautiful, and cold, with an ingrained distrust for all men and a deep disdain for the sea and the affairs of the wider world. She saw her father not as a hero, but as the man who had abandoned her mother and herself. The estrangement was absolute. Tar-Aldarion, faced with a daughter who despised his life's work and a wife who had become his political enemy, saw his legacy turning to ash. His line was in peril. He had no son, only a daughter, who had been taught to hate everything he stood for. In his anger and his desperation, he made a decision that would change Númenor forever. He went before the Council of the Scepter and proclaimed a new law of succession. Henceforth, the eldest child of the king, whether male or female, would inherit the throne. He made his daughter, Ankalaim, the official heir. She would be the first ruling queen of Númenor. He did this not for any modern notion of equality, but as a political masterstroke. He believed that by forcing the burden of rule upon Ankalaim, he would force her to care about the kingdom, about the fleet, about the threat from the east. He would trap her in the very life her mother had taught her to reject. When Erendis heard the news, she did not see it as a victory. She saw it as the ultimate betrayal. He had taken her one comfort, her daughter, and chained her to the throne she herself had fled. She journeyed to Armanelos for one final, terrible confrontation. She found him in the high chambers of the king's house, looking out over the bay, towards the sea. He did not turn as she entered. The silence was heavy, with centuries of unspoken bitterness. "You have done this to spite me," she said, her voice devoid of all warmth. Tar-Aldarion finally turned, his face a mask of weary sorrow. "I have done this for Númenor. She is the heir. She will learn her duty." "You speak of duty." Erendis's voice was venomously quiet. "You, who chose the groaning of timber and the whine of ropes over your own wife and child. You have taken my daughter and made her a sacrifice to your own vanity." Her words were like shards of ice. "You have never been a king here, in this land. You are a king of saltwater and foreign shores. You are no husband to me, and you have been no father to her." He looked at the woman he had once crossed the world for, now an implacable enemy forged in the fires of his own neglect. The weight of all the lost years, the silent dinners, the empty bed, settled upon him. There was nothing left to say. The chasm between them was too wide to ever be crossed. He turned his back on her, and on his life in Númenor, and walked towards the door, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous hall. He was leaving again, and this time they both knew it was for good. As his hand touched the great carved door, her voice, cold and final, cut through the silence behind him. "The sea longing has been your life. You have worshipped the waves more than the Valar. Then let the sea be your master." Aldarion did not look back. The great door boomed shut, and Erendis was left alone in the twilight of the vast chamber, a queen of a silent, empty palace. Her great war was over, and she had lost everything. And so the great mariner king departed, a ghost in his own home, leaving behind two queens. One, a queen of sorrows, consumed by a victory that felt like ash in her mouth, and the other, a queen in waiting. But as the years of Aldarion's final absence stretched on, and Ankalim's power grew, a disturbing question began to surface. Was she truly the pawn her parents believed her to be? Was she merely a vessel for her mother's grief and her father's ambition? Or had their endless war forged something else entirely? Something colder, sharper, and far more dangerous than either of them could have ever conceived. Ankalim took to her new role as heir with a chilling composure. She did not rail against it, nor did she embrace it with the dutiful reluctance her father had hoped for. She simply accepted it. She remained in the quiet lands of the West with her mother, far from the capital, but the power of the heir now radiated from her. She held court, she made judgments, she managed the vast estates, and those who came before her found not a resentful girl, but a woman with an unnerving stillness, whose decisions were swift, logical, and utterly devoid of warmth. Erendis watched her daughter, at first with pride, then with a growing sense of unease. She had taught Ankalim to be strong, to be independent, to never need a man, but she had not intended to extinguish her heart. Ankalim showed no love for anyone, not even her own mother. She performed her affection as another duty, a role to be played. The real Ankalim was retreating somewhere deep inside, behind a mask of perfect, icy control. And she developed a strange, secret habit. Periodically, she would vanish from her court, casting off her fine clothes and dressing in the rough garb of a shepherdess. She would wander the hills alone for days, taking shelter with farmers who had no idea they were housing the future queen of Númenor. Erendis believed she was fleeing the pressures of her station, seeking the simple life her mother had always praised. The truth was far more complex. This was not an escape. It was a hunt. In this guise, she could watch people. She could listen to their unguarded thoughts, study their weaknesses, and understand the true mechanics of power, not from a throne, but from the dirt. It was a game of ultimate control, played by a master of deception. Her mother, blind to this inner world, had one final goal: to see Ankalim married, but not to a lord from the capital, not to a sea captain loyal to Aldarion. She must marry one of their own, a lord of the Westlands, to cement their family's power and ensure the line of succession was forever severed from her husband's influence. She chose a man named Mamandil, the son of a local lord, quiet, unassuming, and utterly devoted to the land. He was, in Erendis's eyes, the perfect antidote to Aldarion. When she presented him to her daughter, Ankalim regarded the young man with the cool, appraising stare of one examining livestock. She had not been raised to love a man. She had been raised to rule them. "I will not be a pawn in your war against my father," Ankalim stated, her voice as crisp and cold as a winter morning. She stood before her mother, not as a daughter, but as a monarch, addressing a tiresome subject. "This Mamandil is your choice, not mine." Erendis's face, etched with years of sorrow, hardened. "He is a good man of the land. He is everything your father was not." "Precisely," Ankalim replied. "He is a tool, and I will not be wed to a tool of your design." Ankalim then played her masterstroke, one she had been preparing for years in the guise of a humble shepherdess. "If I must marry to secure the scepter," she said, a flicker of something cruel in her eyes, "then I have already made my choice." From the shadows of the hall, a man stepped forward. He was handsome, but a commoner, a sheep herder from the hills named Halatan. Erendis stared, aghast. This was not a power play. It was a humiliation. "You would raise a shepherd to the throne?" Erendis whispered, her voice cracking. "To spite me?" "No," Ankalim said, her gaze unwavering. "To rule. I learned from you and my father that marriage is not about love. It is about power. Your choice would have bound me. Mine serves me." In that moment, Erendis saw the truth. She had not forged a strong, independent woman. She had honed the blade that would deliver her own heart's final wound. She had taught her daughter to be a queen, and a queen has no mother. And then, after 20 years of silence, news came like a thunderclap from the east. The Vingelot, Aldarion's great ship, had been sighted. He was returning. An old man now, the sea-longing finally exhausted, coming home to die. For Erendis, something broke. The hatred that had sustained her for decades collapsed, leaving only a vast, aching void of what might have been. She had won her war, but her husband was a stranger, her daughter a queen of ice, and her home a prison of her own making. Driven by an impulse she hadn't felt since she was a girl, she fled, not to the port, but to the white shores of her own lands. She, who had cursed the sea for a lifetime, now ran towards it. Perhaps she thought she could meet him. Perhaps she thought the waters themselves could grant her an absolution he never would. She walked into the waves, the cold spray on her face a final, bitter baptism. The woman born of the land was reclaimed, at last, by the sea she had despised. Aldarion returned to a kingdom in mourning for a queen he barely knew anymore. He saw his daughter, Onchalime, waiting for him, not with a daughter's love, but with a successor's patience. He was the last piece of the past that needed to be swept away. Weary to his bones, he passed the scepter of Númenor into her steady, cold hand. And then, the great mariner king, the lord of ships and far-flung shores, let go, his long voyage finally over. So began the reign of Tar-Aldarion, the first ruling queen of Númenor. She ruled for many years, a powerful and effective monarch. But her court was a place of cold duty, not joy. She did not love her husband, and eventually sent him away. She did not love her son. She did not love her people. She ruled them, with the perfect, chilling logic of a mind forged in the crucible of her parents' hatred. She was the final legacy of Aldarion and Erendis, a lonely throne, a silent palace, and a crown of bitter, absolute victory. The tragic story of the mariner's wife has reached its end, but it is just one chapter in the epic saga of Númenor's rise and its inevitable, cataclysmic fall. To witness the coming of the shadow, the forging of the great rings, and the downfall of the greatest kingdom of men, make sure you subscribe to the _Silmarillion_Chronicles. The history of Middle-earth is waiting.